Why don't we get started? Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Jennifer Prestholt, and I'm one of the deputy directors here at the Advocates for Human Rights. I also direct our International Justice Program. Welcome to everyone to our fundraiser today and our celebration of the global fight for LGBTIQ+ rights. It's so great to be here with all of you virtually. Before we get into the program, I have just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this event, so you can watch it again on our YouTube channel or share it with your friends later. I also want to invite all of you to our Human Rights Awards dinner on June 22nd, in person or virtually, and a link to the details for that event will be in the chat. We have everyone muted to minimize the background noise, so please use chat to introduce yourself and say hi and where you're from. The chat function is at the bottom of your screen. There's also a CC or closed caption button at the bottom of the screen in case you want to turn on automatic closed captioning. And last but not least, there's a reactions button, which you can use to applaud, show agreement, to celebrate, or to raise your hand. I would like to give a special thanks to our host committee for their engagement in today's event. Many of you have heard about this event from a member of our host committee. Raise your hand in the reactions panel or wave on the screen if this is your first event with the Advocates for Human Rights. You will hear today about some of the ways that the Advocates is working to protect LGBTIQ+ rights. You can be a part of that work today simply by texting human rights, HUMANRIGHTS, no spaces, to 44321 to donate, or you can click on the link in chat. As one of our priority areas of work at the Advocates works across all of our programs to uphold the rights of LGBTIQ+ people and others who are experiencing violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, or sex characteristics. Today, we'll be talking about that work, and you'll hear more about how we help LGBTIQ+ migrants who are fleeing persecution find safety in the United States, how we empower our LGBTIQ+ clients to share their lived experiences by participating in international advocacy at the United Nations, and how we partner with LGBTIQ+ human rights defenders throughout the world to promote equality in their countries. So with that, it is my very great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Nathan Madsen. Nathan is a staff attorney with the International Justice Program. And before he arrived at the Advocates, Nathan received his PhD in anthropology at New York University, where he researched human rights activism among LGBTIQ+ organizations in Hong Kong. Welcome, Nathan.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before we start, I want to briefly talk about the terminology and specifically the acronym LGBTIQ+. Significant portions of the United Nations are currently using the acronyms LGBTI and SOGI, which stand for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex, and sexual orientation and gender identity, respectively. These acronyms, however, don't recognize the other identities that fall under the queer and transgender umbrellas, such as pansexuals, asexuals, gender non-binary people, etc. Unfortunately, many of these communities who have been excluded by the acronym LGBTI and SOGI, or SOGI, have a long history of exclusion, both from outside the queer and trans community and from within. So that is why we at the Advocates use LGBTIQ+ to be as inclusive as possible of all people within the queer and trans community. We are also in the process of updating our website to better reflect this more inclusive language. Our first speaker today is Julia Valero, paralegal and intake coordinator with the Advocates Refugee and Immigrant Program. Prior to joining the Advocates, Julia worked closely with families, adults, and children in detention in Texas by providing legal services as well as advocacy regarding mistreatment, inadequate medical care, and other human rights issues inherent to the U.S. immigration system. She will be talking about some of the human rights abuses that LGBTIQ+ people face and what drives them to seek asylum, as well as the specific issues that transgender, non-binary, and queer people experience when it comes to migration. Julia?
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you all. It's great to be with you today. So I just want to start out by saying I feel lucky to work with the Advocates as an organization that engages the queer community and the trans and non-binary communities who are seeking asylum, who are doing activism in the diaspora or in their countries of origin, and in a range of other capacities. My team, the Refugee and Immigrant Program, works closely with queer and trans communities who are seeking asylum and other forms of relief from deportation. And as a sort of natural part of that process, we discuss what experiences cause people to migrate in the first place. It's no secret that across the world, queer, trans, and non-binary people are targeted simply for being who they are. People are subjected to torture, sexual violence, physical and psychological abuse, imprisonment, and ostracization from their communities and families, and more. Even more so if an individual lives at an intersection of targeted identities, such as being Black and/or Indigenous, as well as queer, trans, and/or non-binary. Like many other bases for asylum, queer, trans, and non-binary asylum seekers are also fleeing persecution that is rooted in colonization. Indigenous understandings of gender and sexuality extend beyond the rigid norms imposed by European colonizers. The anti-transness and anti-queerness of today is largely rooted in Euro-American colonization, forced assimilation into Christianity as a part of the process of cultural genocide, and the imposition of a gender binary and normative forms of sexuality. As is unfortunately common for anyone with a targeted identity going through the immigration system, the US government's manner of processing people often echoes or reifies the very persecution that people are fleeing. The right to seek asylum is enumerated under US and international law. Despite this, migrants arriving at the US southern border are often barred entry via Title 42, the Remain in Mexico policy, and metering. All of these policies leave people essentially stranded in Mexican border towns for weeks, months, and sometimes even years. Cartels, well aware of this limbo and the lack of access to protection, target people, especially migrants, for labor, sex, and organ trafficking, among other things. This is only more likely if somebody has an additional targeted identity, like being queer, trans, or non-binary. Upon crossing the border, people are often forced through hieleras and perreras, known as iceboxes and dog pounds in Spanish, due to the freezer-like forced air and the cage-like structures within these immigration prisons. The conditions of these places can also mirror imprisonment that migrants experienced as a part of their persecution. Detention, whether at the border or in the interior of the US, can be deadly, as seen in the continued calls for justice for Roxana Hernandez, a trans woman who died while in immigration custody in 2018 after reportedly being denied requested medical care. Detained trans people are regularly misgendered and incarcerated along populations that match their sex assigned at birth rather than their gender. Abuse is widespread in detention in general, including towards queer, trans, and NB migrants. Access to gender-affirming medical care, though required by the detention standards, is also almost non-existent. This is the welcome that the US gives to queer, trans, and non-binary asylum seekers and immigrants. Then, if someone is lucky enough to make it past these barriers, many unfortunately also face homophobia and transphobia from the officers and judges deciding their cases. People are expected to be able to sort of fluidly explain their sexuality or their gender when they may have been abused for this identity their entire life, or they may have suppressed thinking about this identity as a part of their survival. The way that asylum cases are processed or adjudicated by definition is either inquisitorial or adversarial. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing some background noise. Are we able to mute the other participants? Thank you. All right, sorry, I was saying asylum adjudication by its very sort of nature in the law is either inquisitorial or adversarial. In either case, this means that a government officer essentially interrogates asylum seekers about the most intimate and potentially traumatic details of their life, especially so given that many queer, trans, and non-binary asylum seekers are also survivors of sexual violence. Navigating queerness and transness can be a complex and ongoing process, especially when you've been socialized to fear talking about it. This is only compounded when your life depends upon proving both that you are queer and or trans, and that identity marks you for persecution. Because for asylum seekers, deportation could mean a death sentence. Furthermore, your queerness or your transness also has to fit the government officer's understanding of what it means to be queer or trans. And any sort of deviation from this definition could mean that your case is rejected. I'm reminded of former clients who struggled to come out to their attorneys, let alone coming out to an adversarial officer or facing cross-examination from an immigration and customs enforcement attorney. I'm reminded also of past clients who were told that they weren't really being targeted for their sexuality because they're bisexual and thus they weren't really queer. The implication being that because someone is bisexual, they can avoid persecution by choosing to only date people that give the impression that they are in a heterosexual partnership, even though this is utterly divorced from the reality that once somebody is seen as queer in an anti-queer community, they're not safe. I'm reminded in all of this of just countless ways that the immigration system tries to keep putting queer, trans, and non-binary people into boxes of how they should perform their queerness and transness. Being queer, trans, and NB by its very nature defies boxes and binaries. And so it's undeniable that queer, trans, and non-binary people face many barriers on their journey to perceived safety in the US. At the same time, though, there continue to be serious violations of the human rights of queer, trans, and non-binary people within the United States. As we've continued to see, state legislatures are restricting how sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression can be taught about in public schools. They're passing laws that prohibit trans athletes from competing, and they refuse to investigate instances of hate crimes against the LGBT+ community. 2021 was also the deadliest year on record for trans people in the United States. Even when people survive the US immigration system, they might not survive the United States itself. Despite all of this, the queer, trans, and non-binary communities have long been on the forefront of human rights issues. I'm reminded of the inspiring fight that we've seen from the queer migrant community, such as drag queens protesting the border wall in Brownsville, Texas in 2019. We wouldn't have pride parades too if it were not for the Stonewall riots and the bravery of individuals like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, and Storme de la Vie. Groups like the Black Trans Queer Migrant Liberation Project and Familia Trans Queer Liberation Movement continue to make inspiring strides for migrant justice and the queer, trans, and non-binary communities. We have come so far, and yet we still have so far to go. To quote the Transgender Law Center, "We are not free until Black trans women are free." If migrant justice does not also push for Black trans liberation, it is not truly fighting for migrant liberation. Migrant members of the queer, trans, and non-binary communities have long been fighting for justice and liberation for themselves and the migrant community in general. Everyone else just has to join in. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Now we're going to watch an interview with Simon Moy and Harry Ite, two current asylum clients with the advocates who have changed the human rights conditions that force them to flee. Welcome. We're here today with Harry Ite and Simon Wesa, both of whom are asylum clients of the Advocates for Human Rights, but who have also been involved in international justice advocacy at the United Nations and in other aspects of the work that we do at the Advocates for Human Rights. So welcome, Harry and Simon. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So I know that both of you came to Minnesota and applied for asylum, but then after you had started your application for asylum, you decided that you wanted to volunteer with the Advocates for Human Rights. Can you explain why you wanted to get involved and why you do continue to volunteer with the Advocates?
Okay, I'll go first. I think for me, it's just been a part of working, because of the Advocates does a lot of work when it comes to human rights, not just in Minnesota, but just in general. And because of the background that I have had, volunteering and working in spaces where human rights fights and struggles are also very immensely valuable. And so for me, it was very important that I was a part of that process when I was reached out to, because of, there are times when you feel like you're not doing enough, when you could be doing so much more in helping for the acceptance and the protection of people whose rights are being trampled on. And so it was a good opportunity to still be here and still be involved somewhat in the fight for the rights of people like me who are wherever they are in the world, and lending my, sort of knowledge and lived experience to whatever project that is being worked on. So for me, it's been a very fulfilling process and journey. And I know that I would not have been able to go through this entire process without volunteering in itself.
Thank you. Simon, what drew you to the Advocates? What about us really drew you in terms of wanting to volunteer?
Yeah, so before I came to the United States, I was an advocate for human rights, specifically LGBT rights. So when I moved to the United States and found out the advocates for human rights during my asylum applications, I found that advocates was doing work related to almost what I was doing back home. So that's how I picked interest, because I found it as another platform for me to continue the same kind of work I was doing back home.
And, in the global north, a lot of the times we're really focused on, when it comes to LGBTI plus rights, on these big goals, like let's get same-sex marriage, or let's get a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation passed. And those are important. And those are important to a lot of LGBTI plus individuals. But a lot of the times, there are these smaller, more achievable goals that advocates can focus on or should focus on. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. What is some of the things that you've seen in your work, either in your home countries or in the United States, that are smaller, more achievable goals that we also need to be paying attention to when it comes to LGBTI plus advocacy?
Okay. I think what is very important for me personally, I think that we need to come to a space where we are focusing a bit more on storytelling, right? I don't say it just as a media person. I feel like back home, there's a lot of mind shift. I mean, there's a mind shift, sorry, that needs to happen back home with the people who are in the society, right? The people make the government. Now, on the issue of, LGBT rights and acceptance, we need to get the people to be more open, to be more accepting, to be more loving, to embrace their LGBT brothers, sisters, their LGBT colleagues, their LGBT parents, their LGBT children. We need to get the people to understand that this is it's not an abnormality, that LGBT folks are normal. They have feelings. They deserve to be here as much as the heteros are here also, right? And so, but how do we get to that space? What do we need to do to get to that space? We need to change their hearts and minds. How do we change their hearts and minds? We need to start with storytelling. The media has to stop misrepresenting the community. We need to see much more balanced, nuanced representation of LGBT folks on the screen. And for me, I think that is a good place to start. LGBT folks are like every other person, right? There's nothing special about someone who's LGBT. They're just like you and they're like me. We are people who deserve our human rights to be fulfilled, to be protected, to be respected. We are people who deserve to be here, to live, to walk, to live a decent life, to make money, to earn a living, right? Maybe from that moment on, we can now start to see real change, because the people, are coming around. And when the people come around, they realize that these laws that we have don't favor us anymore. These laws are inhumane. These laws don't protect a group of people, and they need to go.
That's a very interesting question. But as Harry said, the overall grassroots change should be from the bottom, which is mindset change. People should change their perspective on how they look at LGBT people. Because unless we change the mindset of people, even if we pass whatever amount of legislation, it might not really provide the overall protection of LGBT individuals, because legislation alone might exist as words on the books, in the shelf, but with less impact down, or it's not something you can easily implement. But nevertheless, legislation also, meaningful legislation, can create impacts. LGBT rights are also human rights and should be protected. So I feel like it should be it should be an overhaul of the whole systems, right from the grassroots mindset, and having legislation or passing laws that fully protect individuals like us, not having clauses in constitutions that contradict other clauses in the same constitution, you know? So to me, that's how I would look at that kind of point.
Thank you. Yeah. In a previous life before I joined the Advocates, I was an anthropologist of human rights and a legal anthropologist that focused on queer advocacy in Hong Kong. And when I was there, it was the same kinds of things. It was focusing on these sort of small moments of inflection that you could make a change, whether that was changing hearts and minds, which was a preoccupation of a lot of the advocates that I was working with, to make sure that Hong Kongers and Chinese people more broadly, because there was a lot of movement from Taiwan and China in Hong Kong as well, to think of LGBTI people not as different, right? That they weren't different, that they weren't less than, that they weren't some foreign influence, that they were Hong Kongers, just like everybody else. And that it didn't matter what their sexual orientation was, their gender identity or gender expression. None of that impacted the fact that they were Hong Kongers. They were part of the society and they deserved to be treated equally because they were part of that society. And so making that point and driving that point home started to change people's minds and not think of LGBTI human rights as special rights for a special group of people, or that LGBTI people were looking for something that heterosexual cisgender people were not getting. It was to be shifting the laws so that it wasn't just a matter of societal acceptance, but a legal acceptance. And I think, Simon, your point is dead on, that it is a matter of changing hearts and minds, but it is also a matter of changing the laws, and it has to be both. Why is it important for organizations like the Advocates to be involved? What is it about, your experiences with the Advocates? Why is that important for LGBTI rights advocacy around the world?
There's a lot of context that's missing with organizations that are focused only in America, who engage with people that are just, whose primary focus is just the US, or kind of US and Canada, or do you know what I'm saying? I feel like the beauty of an organization that does international advocacy is that they understand the issues a bit more, their minds are more open, right? And they can engage with people, whether they are asylum seekers or activists back home on the ground who are doing work. They know how to engage with them in a way that is not disrespectful and is also it's in a way empowering for the people who are doing the work, for people who are there. And you don't feel like they walk with you without you giving up your power, right? You don't feel like you're powerless. You don't feel like you don't have a voice. And some organizations may not have that intention, but that's what happens, right? And so we need more organizations to come up that, understand country context, engage with people on that level. Like I said before, if we are going to fight for a world that is just, that is equitable, that has equal access for everybody, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, we need to also have room for people who to have different experiences, who are not as privileged, who are Black, who are African, who are Asian, who are poor. Like, you need to be able to have your organization be as open and as reaching on all fronts. And I think I think that's what is lacking in many organizations, and to no fault of theirs, right? We come into situations with our privileges, but sometimes we need to be able to step back and reassess. And so that's why the work that Advocates does is very important, because they understand these issues and they're able to engage in that manner. And it would only help if more organizations, we have more advocates. Advocates for human rights cannot do everything for everybody. Do you get what I'm saying? They cannot, they are, there is limited capacity that advocates can handle, if we're being realistic. And so we need to have more advocates. We need more organizations to step up and be like advocates, in helping to achieve, because when we achieve this thing that we want, everybody benefits from it, And so we need more organizations to step up and start to, be more open and understand more. And maybe advocates can even try to start recommending how they do their work to other organizations, start to do maybe capacity building for other organizations, start to, things that you have learned, right? Provide more resources for other organizations who are doing the same. Maybe they are doing just maybe helping people with asylum, or maybe they're providing legal aid, or maybe they just do international advocacy. Well, whatever it is that they're doing, advocates can step in and help build people to be more like them, so that the burden is not just on advocates for human rights in the whole of the Midwest. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Harry Ite and Simon Moesa for sharing their experiences with us today, as well as their reminder about what we can do here in Minnesota, states across the world, to fight for LGBTI plus rights. That was a really wonderful interview that I had with Harry and Simon last week, who were unable to join us live today because of work schedules, but we were happy to have their participation in this event nonetheless. So now we are going to be hearing from Inusha Buya from the Eagles for Life Kenya. He is the executive director, and this organization is based in Kisii, Kenya. Enosh has worked in LGBTIQ+ and sex work activism for 12 years, both in Kenya and across Africa. The Advocates and the Eagles for Life have collaborated for several years on international advocacy at the United Nations Human Rights Mechanisms and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. Enosh, please tell us a little bit about the Eagles for Life. And while Enosh is talking, we're going to be putting some links to our most recent written reports on LGBTIQ+ rights in Kenya in the chat.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Let me take this opportunity to thank the Advocate for Human Rights for the great work and partnership that we have been working with them for the last 3 joint reports. So I'll brief talk about Eagles for Life, then I'll go straight to talk about preparation of future allies, where we engage with the higher learning institutions. So Eagles for Life is LGBTI organization based in Kenya with the programs designed to advocate for human rights, especially the rights of LGBTI persons. We have been in existence since 2010, and during our work, we have been able to realize that LGBTI persons in Kenya continue to face daunting challenges in their quest for the full realization of fundamental rights and freedoms. Eagles for Life vision is a just and inclusive society for LGBTI persons. We do this one through creating just inclusive society for gender, and sexual minority by empowering LGBTI persons to claim for their rights, enhance access to responsible services by engaging youth bearers on policies, stimulating dialogues with the general public to promote tolerance and the respect for diversity in Kenya. So we have 4 thematic pillars that we focus our programs. The number 1 pillar is empowerment of LGBTI person. This is where we focus more of self-awareness, building knowledge on LGBTI rights, and also focusing on well-being. The pillar number 2 is engagement with the movers and shakers. This is where we focus our programs to the duty bearers or the state actors. And much of work around this pillar is about developing a meaningful partnership with the duty bearers and also having other influential institutions. So when I talk about influential institutions, this is where we also engage with the higher learning institutions like universities and the colleges. On the same, we also engage with the county and national governments to ensure that we analyze and also we analyze policies and advocate on the same. Then the pillar number 3 is a connection with the general population. So for us, when we are talking about the general population, we are talking about religious leaders, cultural leaders, and opinion leaders. So this is the population that have an influence based on like the cultural leaders, the custodian of culture, the religious leaders, the custodian of religious beliefs. And then the last one is about institutional strengthening. That's where we look internally, how do we strengthen our capacity to ensure that we deliver the mandates. Moving forward, I'll talk about briefly some of the achievements that we have been able to do since 2010. Eagles for Life have been managed to actually to reach out to 480 LGBTI individuals who have been able to attend therapy sessions that we have. I talked about the pillar number 1 that looking at the self-awareness and the well-being. Then we have also managed to have 112 LGBTI participating in faith wellness sessions. So we have a program that we call it a faith engagement that targets LGBTI and LGBTI of faith and the religious leaders. Then we have also managed to train 265 LGBTI on human rights and safety and security. So on the same, we have a violence response system. This is where we have been able to train 25 paralegals. And currently on the same, we have been able to, in 2021, we documented 432 violence cases. And currently we have resolved 112. And the rest are ongoing with the process. In court, some of them are in police stations and some are then courts for judicial process. On the same note, we have been also reached out to 1,556 general population. That's where we talk about, when I talk those numbers, we have reached out to cultural leaders, opinion leaders, and the religious leaders. So, and also as well as we have a cohort of religious leaders who are opening dialogues in their faith spaces from Anglican Seventh-day Pentecostal churches that are actually separate. We call them outreaches that they're conducting in their faith spaces. So I will move straight to the preparation of future allies. So stalker leaders. So when we talk about future allies, one of the things why we are doing this one is because we have discovered that failure of the healthcare duty bearers to provide service for LGBTI persons, it's because of the culture and the religion beliefs. And also this one also, they were not able to debunk, or they are not able to go through the myths and the conception that they had during the early stages.
So as you are aware, Kenya is one of the African countries that are still holding into the progressive culture, religious and the legal perspective that confine the perpetuate stigma and discrimination against LGBTI persons. On the same, there's a lot of work that has been done for focusing the youth bearers, but we have not been able to focus to higher learning institution preparations of these young professionals who are in a vocational formation. So we realize that it is important to tap to this opportunity of engaging the youths and engaging these youths at a higher learning institution to tap in and also sensitize them so that they can be able to even develop interest in the issues of contemporary issues in the society. So, and also the another thing that the reason why we decided to focus on the higher institution is because I know most of us, also for those who are not aware, we petitioned the government to repeal Section 162 that talks about the canon knowledge that criminalizes LGBTI persons in Kenya. One of the things that came out from the ruling that we received at the High Court, it was about lack of enough research on LGBTI issues that could have been able to inform the judiciary, the judges, to inform a better or a favorable ruling to repeal Section 162 and 165. Then at the same time, we looked at the universities in Kenya. They have a bigger say, or they have a bigger picture of shaping the community mindset. So that's why we used, like, if we can be able to engage with the higher learning institutions, we can be able to also now influence the community members. We can influence the different community of the society individuals through the university. And also at the same time, we currently have the looking from the instances, cases that we documented in previous years from 2018, we have realized that most of these cases are happening at a higher learning institutions. So that's important. We also looked at it is important to engage with the faculties, to sensitize them, and also having these programs targeting higher learning institutions to reduce violence in learning institution. And also this will be enabled to have even having an enabling environment for individuals to come out while they're when they're in university. So what do we do? So what we do with the higher learning institution, we provide opportunities for students to interrogate the early messages they have received on gender and sexuality. So this one can be able to actually enable them to start having open minds, and also to start having factual information around the LGBTI, so that they can be able to start now having informed opinion and informed perceptions towards LGBTI persons. Then also this also opens the opportunities for students to start developing interests in social research and around gender and sexuality in contemporary society. Then the last one is also having engaging with the faculty members. This one now enables to create a platform where LGBTI who are in these institutions to be able to talk and also open up if there is any issue to the faculty teams. Then we are doing this one in different approaches. We have approaches that we are using. We use dialogues with the students, and also we involve the faculty teams. We conduct moot courts and moot courts competitions, debate competition, festival competition. Then also working on the research, and some of the research information that the paperwork that research papers we have seen from students, it has really helped in terms of developing the county policies and some of the bills that are still on the pipeline. And then through this one, we conduct what we call human rights talks. This is where we
we invite different expertise who comes in and talks of human rights specific areas that addresses human discrimination, violence, preventions. So we do it much also to this so that we can be able to open up the mind of young professionals who are in vocational formation.
Thank you so much, Enosh.
We
are really happy with the partnership that we have with the Eagles for Life Kenya, and we've worked with them for quite a number of years. And many of the links that we had sent out earlier in the chat, the link to documents that Eagles for Life Kenya has engaged with us at the Advocates on, that really explains the breadth of work that the Eagles for Life does. So thank you so much, Enosh. And now we're going to be turning it over to Senior Staff Attorney Amy Bergquist to provide some comments and to watch an interview that she conducted earlier with Olga Baranova from the Moscow Community Center for LGBT+ Initiatives. Amy?
Thanks so much, Nathan, and great to have you all here. The Advocates for Human Rights has been collaborating with the Moscow Community Center for LGBT+ Initiatives for quite some time. Jerry Terrell, one of our host committee members, traveled with us to Moscow on one of those occasions. And I see that Charlie Rounds is here. He hosted a dinner for the Moscow Community Center folks on another occasion when they came here to Minnesota. So the Moscow Community Center is, as it sounds like, a community center, but they're also really active. They came into the spotlight in 2017 when the pogroms began in Chechnya, helped evacuate people from Chechnya, set up a shelter in Moscow to help provide temporary refuge, try to get people resettled into places where they could seek safety. But we've been collaborating with them in mutually beneficial ways. So they have, for example, been helping us understand how we can better serve the needs of our LGBTQIA+ clients, to make them feel more welcome and to better integrate them into a society here in Minnesota. And we've been collaborating, we were both volunteer-driven organizations, so we've been collaborating to share best practices on how we use volunteers. We've had some really great experiences with them, but unfortunately in February of this year, there were two strokes of bad news. Moscow Community Center was named a foreign agent by the Russian government, and this is because purportedly they regularly receive foreign funds and they engage in so-called political activities, even though they're a community center where people get together to learn foreign languages and do book shares and things like that. And the implications of this are really pretty stark. Moscow Community Center is like the only the seventh non-media organization to get this designation. It means every communication they issue, including any Facebook posts or tweets or things, have to be labeled with this foreign agent designation. They also have to register with the government and disclose their executive director, who imminently will also be named a foreign agent and be subject to these same requirements. And then they have to do quarterly reporting of every single expenditure and every single kopeck that they receive in funding. So it's really quite burdensome. Moscow Community Center is suing the government to challenge this designation, and that process is ongoing. So I wanted to catch up with Olga, and we spoke last week about how that's going, but I also wanted to talk to her about how the war in Ukraine has influenced civil society and has influenced the LGBTIQ+ community in Russia. And so you'll hear a little bit about that as well. So we'll go ahead and play the video, and then I'll make a few other comments as well.
Ну, мы как бы предугадывая развитие событий, сделали шаг, на шаг впереди мы постарались быть, и это помогло. Мы закрыли Московский комьюнити-центр для ЛГБТ и открыли проект МКЦ. То есть у нас есть проекты Московского комьюнити-центра для ЛГБТ, и эти проекты могут проходить на разных площадках. Как организация это существует, но мы не привязаны, Московский комьюнити-центр, сейчас к какому-то конкретному помещению. То есть мы можем находиться там или сям, арендовать площадки временные И существует отдельно проект МКЦ, который не иностранный агент, который не имеет прямого отношения к Московскому комьюнити-центру для ЛГБТ. Это кафе в модном кластере, в прекрасном месте, кафе и коворкинг, это буккроссинг, место для игр, место для встреч. У нас на двери висит радужный флаг, в том числе. Еще у нас висит 10 разных знаков, в том числе авокадо фри. То есть как бы у нас висит звезда Давида, у нас висит... То есть наша политика этого кафе, что это френдли кафе для людей, которые открыты ко всему новому. И сначала мы проводили там встречи с открытым адресом, ЛГБТ-встречи с открытым адресом, но к нам пришла полиция буквально на второе мероприятие, и начали нам говорить, что «А у вас что тут происходит? У вас тут ЛГБТ встречаются?» Мы говорим: «Мам, мы не знаем, встречаются какие-то люди, мы для всех открыты, в чем проблема? Как бы вот у нас место для всех».
Статус иностранного агента – это не единственное плохое событие в феврале. Конечно, 24 февраля Россия напала в Украину. Мы много слушаем о войне, но не так много о том, как война повлияет на гражданское сообщество в России. Что ты слышишь от твоих друзей, коллег в России, о том, как война влияет на гражданское общество?
Вот. Что наблюдаем мы с ЛГБТ-сообществом? Это то, что люди массово начали бежать из России. И много очень запросов, то есть вплоть до того, что мы составили шаблон ответа на эти письма, такой поток запросов был. Был один день, когда я отправила, наверное, 15 писем, то есть мы написали 15 писем о положении ЛГБТ в России. То есть мы ничего больше не можем сделать. Я тем, кто что-то спрашивает в частном порядке, я объясняю, что, понимаете, ситуация, как бы положение ЛГБТ с началом войны не изменилось. Как было плохо, так как бы и осталось плохо. Как бы никаких новых санкций по отношению к ЛГБТ нет, не существует. То есть то, что люди теперь до них дошло, что как бы вот эта фраза, сегодня в Советском Союзе была такая фраза: сегодня ты играешь джаз, а завтра родину продашь. Джаз был запрещен. И теперь до людей стало доходить, что сегодня садят за то, что ты назвал войну войной, а завтра тебя посадят, потому что ты гей. И люди очень, прям была волна, когда очень, сейчас уже люди успокоились, уже как-то это пришло, человек ко всему привыкает, все пришло в какую-то такую стабильную шизофрению, я не знаю, как это назвать, вот. И, по крайней мере, люди научились с этим жить, психика справилась с тем, что происходит. И то, что помимо того, что люди начали бежать, кто мог бежать, бежал. И я знаю истории, когда на границе проверяли телефоны у людей, прям забирали телефон и смотрели переписку. Вот. Это с моими коллегами границы закрыты, границы сейчас закрывают и закрыты во многих странах. Убежать тоже не все могут, как бы далеко не убежишь. И те люди, которые остались, я вижу, что активность растет у людей. И это тоже очень хорошо, то, что люди стали нас... вот у нас есть, например, радужные посиделки, это такое мероприятие легкого входа, скажем так. И вот у нас раньше эти посиделки, мы вообще их придумывали в основном для волонтеров, чтобы можно было неформально поговорить, посидеть, чай попить, поиграть в какие-то игры. Так вот, у нас последние, вот с началом войны, у нас каждой посиделке приходят новые люди, по 5, по 7 человек. Кто-то один раз приходит, уходит, кто-то приходит, много новых волонтеров, прям большой поток. Особенно, мне кажется, граждане Америки думают, что все мечтают быть гражданами Америки. Как бы, ну, это отчасти правда, но далеко не всегда. Людям покидать свою родину, бросать семью, друзей, близких, квартиры, как бы это сложно. И там родителей, многие просто не могут уехать. Даже если они и мечтают получить американское гражданство, они просто не могут. Ну и я же говорю, многие люди просто не хотят. И таких людей много. И вот у них, мне кажется, что растет гражданская активность, и как государство старается все это задавить, но люди все равно сопротивляются, и я думаю, это будет расти. И то, что тоже я наблюдаю, так как я активистка, ко мне с разных сторон долетают какие-то информация, какие-то знакомые знакомых, и вот я вижу, как люди выходят на улицу на митинги против войны, люди, которые никогда раньше никуда не выходили вообще. И там приходят там какие-то просьбы помочь, проконсультировать, найти юриста, потому что человек вышел, его забрали, или его не забрали, он сбежал, но теперь боится. Это же, активисты, мы проходили какие-то тренинги, мы хоть что-то знаем, тем более особенно мы, кто работал с Чечней, мы чуть больше, чем другие знаем.
So there you get a little bit of a taste of the conversation I had with Olga, and that last reference is also a reminder that if you saw the documentary film Welcome to Chechnya, she's featured in that film quite prominently as one of the heroes who saved lives literally by helping to evacuate people. And so she's really an expert. She, as part of one of our projects, came to Minnesota, and she decided it was no longer safe for her to live in Russia. And so she has since remained in the United States, sought asylum and received asylum. But you can see there's a real passion for her and a real understanding that she's still active. She has not abandoned her role as an advocate, and our role as well is really important to help show solidarity and support. And we hear that every time we go to Moscow to meet with folks at the community center, knowing that they're not alone is really important. And sharing our mutual experiences is also a great way for us to connect with them and show our support. And as you heard when Harry and Simon were talking, they were talking about this mind shift or this mindset change. And I think Olga alludes to this as well, about the important work that they are doing in building the resistance in Russia. And so it's really important for us to play a supporting role in that as well, to help in that regard. And it's just a really great testament to remind people that sometimes it's not safe for people to be active in the country, and people who have fled the country can be some of the strongest, most effective advocates because they have a relative place of safety and can be of support to their friends and colleagues and really understand what's going on the ground and really help that to happen. And so we play an important role as well in that supporting context to help Moscow Community Center. And it's thanks to all of you that we're able to have these partnerships. So I'll pass it off now to Jennifer to help us wrap up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. And thank you also to Nathan and Julia and to Enosh and to everybody who's been involved in today's program. I really appreciate all of the insights provided, and I'm sure that everyone who has participated agrees with me on that. I'm really thankful to be able to do this work and to stand in partnership with our partners here in the US and around the world. And I'm so thankful for everyone that is making this work possible. So today you've heard a little bit about how the Advocates works together across our programs, across borders, across the globe, to make the world a better place for everyone, including members of the LGBTIQ+ community. A lot is happening. there still is a lot of struggle. Julia pointed out the unique challenges that the LGBTIQ plus community or asylum seekers and other migrants face. Harry and Simon exemplify activists who have carried on their work to protect human rights outside once they have had to leave their country, and they are doing that with us in the International Justice Program. We learned a little bit more about the work of our partner, the Eagles for Life in Kenya, and really interesting and hopeful advances that the Eagles for Life is making by focusing on some of these, by focusing on the next generation. And Olga and Amy shared the difficulties that our longtime partner, the Moscow Community Center, has been facing in terms of being labeled a foreign agent, and also the hopefulness that our partnership with the advocates has boosted morale and opened doors outside of Russia. So we do all of this and more together with all of you. This work is really critical. Together we're stronger. Together we're protecting members of the LGBTIQ plus community today and ensuring a brighter and safer future for tomorrow. So join us. Take an easy first step and make a donation right now. Our goal is to raise $10,000 for our work in this area. And right now, as of now, we've raised about $8,475. So all donations today will be matched. Simply text human rights, all one word, to 44321, or you can click on the link in chat to provide support. If you've already given, thank you so much. We're so grateful to each and every one of you. And thank you all for coming today. It's also really important to learn more about how you can support this global fight for LGBTIQ plus rights. And showing up today is a part of showing that allyship. You're giving hope to our clients and to our partners. They know that they're not alone, and they know that their stories are heard and that their voices are amplified. Each and every one of us has a responsibility and the ability to stand up for human rights. So we stand in solidarity with the victims of the war in Ukraine, our Afghan allies, survivors of gender-based violence, and all of the activists like Enosh and like Olga and like Harry and Simon, who are documenting human rights violations as a way to make that change. We can also stand by donating and meeting our match. Together, we will be able to train more human rights defenders, represent more asylum seekers, advocate for stronger laws, and change the world for good. And as you heard Harry say, supporting the advocates will help us build our capacity to support more of the work that's happening with our partners. So that's our program for today. Thank you so much again to all of our speakers. I hope you've all been as inspired as I have by our conversation today. Thank you again for joining us and supporting this critical work with a donation. And I look forward to seeing you at the Human Rights Awards dinner on June 22nd. You can participate in person if you're here in Minneapolis, or virtually from anywhere around the world. So we'll put the registration details in the chat, and see you in June. So with that, I'll say thanks again and have a wonderful day.